Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm John Jessipel. Time is winding down as congressional lawmakers have just a few weeks left this year to get work done in Washington.
So what are some of their biggest priorities? Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson joins us from the Hill to talk about the agenda. Abigail?
Well, Jenna, Congress has just a few legislative days left to agree on a spending bill, or we could see a partial government shutdown in December.
And as long as Trump doesn't interfere, we can move the government forward.
One possible hangup is the $5 billion President Trump wants to begin his promised border wall. Schumer says Republicans and Democrats agreed on $1.6 billion towards strengthening the border through physical barriers, as well as technology like drones. The question remains if that will be enough to get the president's signature.
We need the money to build the wall, the whole wall, not pieces of it all over it.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell feels confident they'll come to an agreement before parts of the government shut down.
No, we're not going to do that.
Another issue that could lead to a dramatic year-end in the Senate is a bipartisan effort to secure a floor vote on a bill that protects Special Counsel Robert Mueller and his investigation.
We want to make sure that the acting Attorney General does not interfere with the Mueller investigation, and we believe our Republican colleagues will join us.
Retiring Republican Senator Jeff Flake will not vote to advance or confirm any judicial nominees until the special counsel bill gets a vote.
How in the world my colleagues don't see this as priority now, I just don't understand. So it does need to come to the Senate floor, and I think it's worth using a little leverage here.
McConnell doesn't think the legislation is necessary.
I've never heard anybody down there say they want to shut it down. I think it's in no danger, and so I don't think any legislation is necessary.
In the House, Republicans elected Kevin McCarthy as their new minority leader, while Nancy Pelosi is working to quiet a growing opposition within her party that could prevent her from becoming the next Speaker of the House.
I intend to win the speakership with Democratic votes. I happen to think that at this point, I'm the best person for that.
Now, today we saw about 16 Democratic House members sign a letter saying they will not vote for Nancy Pelosi to be the next Speaker of the House. But so far, no one in the Democratic Party has officially said they're going to run against her. Now, they won't vote on the next Speaker until January, so that gives Democrats plenty of time if there is a challenger that wants to come forward and run against her January 3rd.
Yeah, a lot can happen between now and then. Abby, one of the big pushes in this lame duck session is criminal justice reform, and that got a big boost last week.
Yes, and the status of that bill is if it makes it to the Senate floor, it will likely pass overwhelmingly. I think there's about 80 senators that say that they will vote for it. But Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says his top priorities are funding the government and passing the Farm Bill. And there are just a small amount of legislative days left that they have to do those things. So he said last week if he can get those two things done without a lot of issues, without a lot of hiccups, then he will consider bringing the criminal justice reform bill to the Senate floor, but he's not confident that there's enough time to pass all of those bills.
Abby, we have a little less than a minute left. In terms of the Senate, nearly 2 weeks after it voted, Florida finally has a new senator-elect.
Yes, Governor Rick Scott officially won the Florida Senate race over the weekend. In a manual recount, he kept his majority over longtime Democratic Senator Bill Nelson and ended up officially winning by about 10,000 votes.
And Abigail, there is still 2 weeks out. There is still another Senate race yet to be decided.
Yes, well, the state of Mississippi, they held a special election on November 6th to replace retiring Senator Thad Cochran, who retired in the spring because of medical reasons. And in the state of Mississippi, you have to win 50% of the votes in order to be elected. They had 2 Republicans and 2 Democratic candidates. So now they're going into a runoff on November 27th between Republican Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, who's been filling in for Cochran since the spring. She's running against Democrat Mike Espy. Hyde-Smith is expected to win, and President Trump announced today that he will actually go campaign for her down in Mississippi next Monday.
Thank you so much, Abigail Robertson, reporting on Capitol Hill. Well, President Trump's push to reshape the judiciary will continue during Congress's lame duck session as senators look to advance 35 judicial nominations. Since taking office, the president has been working to implement sweeping changes in the nation's courts, including the confirmation of 2 Supreme Court justices, as well as pushing through scores of federal judges. As of last week, the president had 84 appointments, almost twice as many as President Obama's 43 appointments, and more than George W. Bush's 80. And Bush Sr.'s 71 appointments at the same time in their second year in office. Still, as Congress returns for a lame duck session, the Senate is bracing for a year-end fight over President Trump's remaining judicial nominations. Well, Chief Counsel and Policy Director of the Judicial Crisis Network, Carrie Severino, joins us now for more. Carrie, thanks for being with us.
Great to be here.
Well, Carrie, last week, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said that his main goal is to confirm as many circuit judges as possible. In the weeks ahead, really, how much time does he have?
Well, you know, the Senate could stay through December. I think it depends a little bit about how obnoxious the Democrats want to be out trying to block things. And there's a lot of judges still on the floor to be confirmed. We've had 84 judges now confirmed, but there's almost 3 dozen waiting in the wings here. And there's also some other work they have to do. So I think they'll stay probably as long as it takes to get these jobs accomplished. I know he sees judges as one of his big legacies. After all, these are people who are going to be in the bench for life. So he really wants to make sure that gets done.
Carrie, as you just mentioned, there's about 2 dozen, I believe 35 judicial nominees available. That's more nominees than there are calendars left on the Senate calendar. Is it possible to get all those through?
Well, again, it kind of depends a little bit on the procedural hurdles the Democrats try to erect. What we've seen, particularly before the election, is Leader McConnell would say, okay, here's a group of nominees, and we're just going to get these done before we all go home. You got to get your homework done before you get to go on vacation, guys. So that's effective. It was very effective to get some judges confirmed before this last recess, and that may be the technique he uses going into this recess as well. Remember, this used to be kind of business as usual for judges. It used to be that you would naturally go through a kind of a package deal of judges, and that's why, you know, during Obama we had both of the lame duck sessions. When he was in office, you would have you know, anywhere between 10 and 2 dozen nominees confirmed during that period. And this time it's actually even more important, because even though Trump started in office with a record number, or not a record number, but a very high number historically of judicial vacancies, it's now even grown. So he's had 84 confirmations, but there are 116 vacancies created. So you have more vacancies being created than there are being filled. We're operating in the red. We just need to move on getting some of these judges confirmed.
Carrie, I know there's a rush to get these judges confirmed before the end of the session, but with Republicans netting at this point 2 Senate seats and potentially 1 more in Mississippi once that jungle primary is carried out, what happens during the next? Why can't they go ahead and pass these in the next Senate session, for those who aren't as familiar with Senate procedures?
Well, they certainly can. The problem is the Senate has a lot of stuff on its plate. They should keep moving and keep working. Just obstruction for the sake of obstruction isn't good for the Senate. It's not good for the country. It's certainly not good for the judiciary. We have people who've been waiting for a vote over a year to get their confirmation finished up. That's unacceptable. It's not fair to the nominees, and we have judicial vacancies that need to be filled for the courts to run effectively.
And Carrie, real quick, what about Republican opposition to judicial nominees? Is there anyone out there who could stop any of the judges from moving through?
Well, Senator Flake certainly seems to be trying to. It's inexplicable to me, because I think everyone across, you know, right, the libertarians, the conservatives, they say judges are great, but Flake is threatening to try to block at least the judges in committee, and maybe even try to vote against those on the floor, to try to negotiate some things he wants from Leader McConnell. I think that's irresponsible. I hope that he thinks better of it, because, again, judges are so important, and he seems to recognize that sometimes now. He maybe will threaten to use those as a hostage. I think ultimately, hopefully, he'll change his mind and see that that's not the best strategy.
Well, so far, no other Republican has joined him in that strategy. Chief Counsel and Policy Director of the Judicial Crisis Network, Carrie Severino, thanks for being with us.
Thanks.
A group of Democratic senators are suing to stop the president's appointment of Acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker. The suit was filed today in federal court. It argues President Trump's pick to replace Jeff Sessions is unconstitutional. The lawsuit claims by appointing Whitaker, President Trump is violating the Appointments Clause of the Constitution because the Justice Department official has never served in a role requiring Senate confirmation. Well, President Trump says he is unlikely to sit down with special counsel Robert Mueller to discuss the Russia investigation. But as Dale Hurd reports, the president says he is preparing to respond to some of the questions being raised by Mueller's team.
President Trump says he's preparing to submit written answers to special counsel Robert Mueller in the Russian collusion investigation and is standing behind his acting attorney general, Matthew Whitaker. The president says he's writing out the answers himself and preparing to submit them to Mueller's team.
Not my team. I'm preparing written answers.
He also stopped just short of ruling out a sit-down interview with the special counsel.
I think we've wasted enough time on this witch hunt. And the answer is probably, we're finished. There was no collusion whatsoever, and the whole thing is a scam.
And the president says he'll leave acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker alone to oversee the Russia investigation.
It's going to be up to him.
But you won't overrule him if he decides to curtail.
I would not get involved.
Whitaker has been critical of the Russia probe in the past.
I could see a scenario where Jeff Sessions is replaced with a recess appointment, and that Attorney General doesn't fire Bob Mueller, but he just reduces the budget so low that his investigation grinds to almost a halt.
The truth is, there was no collusion with the Russians in the Trump campaign.
Democrats who are keen on protecting the Mueller investigation want Whitaker to recuse himself. Congressman Adam Schiff, the likely next chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, calls Whitaker's appointment unconstitutional.
Constitutionally, it has to be subject to confirmation, and ethically, he should have absolutely nothing to do with the investigation.
But Trump defended Whitaker.
I think he's very well aware politically. I think he's astute politically. He's a very smart person, a very respected person. He's going to do what's right.
And President Trump will probably not answer all of special counsel Robert Mueller's questions, specifically the one about obstruction. The president says there was no obstruction of justice. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, CNN now says its lawsuit against the Trump administration is no longer necessary because the White House has fully restored the press credentials of correspondent Jim Acosta. Acosta's hard pass credentials were temporarily restored Friday after a court ruling found he was being denied due process when the White House suspended his pass. The White House indicated this morning once the court's temporary order runs out, it could take away Acosta's hard pass again, but this afternoon announced it wouldn't take that action.
Well, CBN News chief political analyst David Brody joins us now for more. David, just because both sides are kind of backing down, for now at least, does that mean that this is all over?
Absolutely not, Jenna and John. As a matter of fact, nowhere near over, and we are just getting word late this afternoon as the reason the White House gave Jim Acosta his hard pass back is because they just set down some new rules, and I need to read you a few of these real quick because this is going to be very interesting. First of all, number one, this coming straight from the White House, hot off the press, if you will. A journalist called upon by the president to ask a question will ask only a single question only and then yield the floor to other journalists. Now, the president, and this is what it says, at the discretion of the president or another White House official, a follow-up question may be permitted, but basically, it's up to the president if that journalist gets a second question. And by the way, when it says they'll have to yield the floor after a second question, here it is. Yielding the floor includes, when applicable, physically surrendering the microphone to White House staff for use by the next questioner. And then the letter finally ends with, quote, "Happy Thanksgiving."
David, so what happens when the reporters break these rules?
Well, when those reporters break the rules, guess what? ... We're back in court again, and we're doing another Faith Nation segment, because that's exactly what's going to happen. You know, Jim Acosta / everybody else in the briefing room is going to watch. I say the briefing room, it sounds like it's a presidential press conference, not necessarily the briefing room. We still need to get clarification on that. But clearly, every reporter in town doesn't want to just ask one question, including yours truly. And so we'll have to see how that goes.
Well, David, staying on the topic of Trump and the press, the White House Correspondents Association made a bit of a statement today and a bit of news announcing its speaker at next year's Correspondents' Dinner.
That's right. They're not going to have a comedian. So Michelle Wolf and all of the comedians are out, so the joke's on them. And instead, Ron Chernow, a renowned author. He did the Hamilton biography, actually the actual musical Hamilton based off of that biography, and also the George Washington biography done by him. He will speak about the First Amendment at the big White House Correspondents' Dinner coming up in the spring. Now, there are two schools of thought here. Some folks say basically that this was a capitulation to Donald Trump because he never wanted a comedian in the first place, and guess what? There won't be a comedian, so a lot of people think Trump won. Having said that, folks, I mean, Jenna and John, you know that indeed what's going to happen is that this author will talk about the First Amendment, and it'll be, in essence, some sort of soapbox speech about the First Amendment and potentially some things that Trump and this administration are doing wrong.
Yeah. Hey, David, what can you tell us about this letter by some Democrats who don't want Nancy Pelosi to be the speaker?
Right. A letter came out also this afternoon. Always breaking news. Every day in the Trump administration, there's breaking news. But Nancy Pelosi basically wants to be speaker. She needs 218 votes. This letter that came out has 16 Democrats saying, no, we don't want you to be speaker. So if you do the math, she can only lose 14 Democrats at this point. 16 are on the letter. If that stands, she wouldn't be speaker. Having said that, no one expects necessarily these 16 Democrats, just because they're on the letter saying they won't vote for Pelosi now, doesn't mean come January that she won't be Speaker of the House. Things have a way of working themselves out here in Washington.
And we can always count on you, David, to help us figure out how they work out in Washington. David, thank you so much for your insights.
Thanks, guys.
Well, up next, more people missing. The latest on the wildfire crisis in California.
Welcome back. Well, devastating news. At least 77 people have been killed in the Camp Fire in Northern California, and nearly 1,000 people are still unaccounted for.
CBN's White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us from the North Lawn with how the president is planning to help those who still have loved ones missing. Ben?
Well, Jenna and John, President Trump touched down in the Golden State this weekend to see that devastation firsthand. It is there he promised to secure a substantial amount of funds to help those affected by these wildfires. It's a desperate search to find survivors as wildfires rage on in California. Over the weekend, President Trump was on the ground visiting some of the most devastated areas.
This is very sad to see it.
The commander-in-chief also signed a presidential declaration securing funds to help with rescue and recovery efforts.
I really appreciate the president himself being here and putting the focus and the spotlight on probably the worst tragedy that California's ever faced.
Trump has been critical of California's forest leaders, accusing them of gross mismanagement.
We do have to do management, maintenance, and we'll be working also with environmental groups. They've really, I think everybody's seen the light.
The president was criticized over remarks he made, suggesting raking the forest could help prevent wildfires. More than 8,000 firefighters are on the ground, still fighting the remaining flames. On Sunday, residents held a vigil at a local church to remember those who lost their life, pray for the thousands some still missing, and even honor Paradise, a town that has been reduced to rubble.
And being that it's the town I grew up in, I would definitely like to see it come back. And I know it's going to take a while for that to happen, but I hope by the time it's done, we'll have a new and improved town that's better than ever.
Now, the fire is 65% contained. Nearly 10,000 homes have been destroyed. So a bit of good news to report. Rain is predicted in the forecast coming up for this weekend for California, but it could fall so fast that it could cause mudslides, which could have an impact on the rescue and recovery efforts. That is the latest here at the White House. Ben Kennedy, CBN News.
A tough situation. All right. Thank you, Ben.
Well, coming up, Christmas comes to the White House right where Ben Kennedy is early. The backstory behind this year's Blue Room Christmas tree. Well, with Thanksgiving just a few days away, millions of Americans will be spending time with their family. For some, navigating those family dynamics can be tricky. In his latest book, Dr. Russell Moore addresses the rough waters some families face and how they can keep from capsizing. Jennifer Wishon sat down with him to discuss.
You know the saying, you can pick your friends but not your family? The memory of a family member can inspire spontaneous laughter at the grocery store, bring you to tears, or both. Family life is hard, but Dr. Russell Moore says that's normal.
I think the temptation is to somehow think that if we just love Jesus or if we're just good people, that we're not going to have these difficult times that come with family. And in reality, that's never what Jesus promised us. He said to us that our lives within the family are about carrying the cross. And so that means that every interaction that we have within a family is an opportunity to pour oneself out. To sacrifice oneself in service to others.
Dr. Moore is president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, the public policy arm of the Southern Baptist Convention. In his latest book, The Storm-Tossed Family, Moore says focusing on the cross will help prevent families from capsizing.
What we see in the cross is that through hurt and through vulnerability, often we see the glory of God.
One of the reasons family life is such a challenge, he believes, is the constant spiritual warfare.
It's because the marriage relationship, for instance, is designed after that picture of Christ in the church. And the relationship of a child to parents or to a larger extended family is a picture of God, who is Father to us, Ephesians chapter 3 says to us. So, of course, the spiritual forces, the principalities and powers, as the New Testament calls them, would rail against that. They don't like the picture of that. And so what you see happening with the family in every generation, in every age, all the time, is similar to what one would see with someone trying to take apart a gospel tract, because that's what the family is.
In this digitally connected era, families often feel their relationships have become unplugged, and depression can set in when scrolling through seemingly perfect families on social media.
You'll have people who think that somehow their entire worth is built up in whether or not their family pictures are Instagrammable enough, and whether or not their children succeed enough. People aren't usually going to present on social media, guess what, Aunt Flossie has another restraining order against her, or my child has been grounded again, or I'm afraid that my spouse and I are going to divorce. People aren't going to do that. But sometimes when we see just the shiny presentation, it can cause this kind of comparison. And the sense is, because I'm having difficulty, that means that I'm not succeeding. When in reality, some of the most biblically grounded and thriving and flourishing families think they're failing. And they think they're failing because it's very difficult and they're facing all sorts of challenges.
Moore says his books typically grow out of the questions he's working through as a husband, father, and pastor. And he says family issues are constant.
Family is not again just a biological accident. Family is picturing something. God is picturing in the family the fatherhood of God. He's picturing in the family the gospel, the union of Christ and his church, the newness of new birth. All of those things are pictured within the family structure.
We need to rely on the church, Moore writes, and instead of dividing ourselves into groups like singles, young married couples, and seniors, Moore suggests we're all facing similar issues and need to rely on each other. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Well, a bit of holiday cheer for President Trump and the First Lady at the White House as the Christmas tree was delivered today. The tree arrived on a horse-drawn carriage. The 22-year-old Fraser Fur traveled to D.C. from North Carolina. It's nearly 20 feet tall and weighs in at 800 pounds. The tree will now be fitted with lights and ornaments, set to be unveiled mid-next week.
I think you have a similar tree in your apartment, right?
Something like that, or maybe something that fits on the table.
800 pounds might be a little too big for the table.
Yeah, I think of Chevy Chase and Christmas Vacation, the tree
movie.
popping out the window.
You're making me ready for Christmas already. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.